Wonderful. Well, thank you all for coming. We're excited to have another collaboration between the professionals of Fairfax County and the pro remodeling and construction organization or companies. So thank you for that. We're excited to learn about zoning and how that might, help have a better understanding of what it is that we need to do and some of the whys as we prepare our projects for permitting. So yeah, we're excited. Thank you very much. Let's take it away.
If you don't mind, maybe I can start. This is Kirsten Munz. I'm with the Permitting and Code Administration Division. And I think when we were exchanging some emails last week, we talked about, I think there were some questions raised about the zoning review of building permits. And so I think as we were just exchanging ideas, we thought it would also be good to talk about the site review that also occurs with building permits, because sometimes those can be related. So Catherine Lunsford is here from the Department of Planning and Development, and she can kind of talk us through what a typical review entails when it goes to zoning. And then Brandy Mueller, who's the branch chief of our Customer and Technical Support Center, can explain the site review, which also happens on those permits. So I guess we can start with Catherine on the zoning review.
Sure. So I'm Catherine Lunsford. I'm the Assistant Section Chief in the Fairfax County Zoning Permit Section. So anything that requires a zoning review comes through my shop. I'm going to talk about residential, and then if you have questions more specific to commercial, I'm happy to address that too. But I think most of what goes on here has to do with residential work, so I will start there. So the zoning ordinance regulates the use of the property, right? So how it's configured, where things can go. Setbacks are the big thing. So when a permit comes in, the technician is going to look to see what the zoning is on the property. Is it a conventional, like an R3, residential 3, or is it a P district, which would mean there could be proffers that are associated with it. So the very first thing we do is determine what the zoning is. If it's just a straight up, R2 or R2 cluster or whatever, it's pretty straightforward. We then look at what they're proposing. We're looking at the setbacks. Does it meet the setbacks? If it's a deck, does it get a permissible encroachment? Because the ordinance allows for encroachments of open decks and roof decks, depending on how high they are. We'll then look at, or stoop and stairs. There are all kinds of things that get a permissible encroachment just by right. We will then look at height, particularly if it's an accessory structure, because it has to be clearly subordinate. It can't exceed 20 feet on certain lot sizes. So we'll look at that kind of stuff. If the permit can be approved by right, once the technician establishes that, and this is for like exterior stuff, once the technician establishes that it meets the setbacks, it meets the height, it meets all the parameters of the ordinance, and they just literally go through one by one, they'll approve the permit. If we're talking about like an interior basement remodel, they're going to look at what are all the components you've got, right? So because we get into accessory living units. So if you've got a kitchenette, a bedroom, a full bathroom, we're going to ask questions. It doesn't mean you can't have it. It just means that we may need more information. And so we encourage the technicians to get on the phone and ask these questions. Occasionally it's so complicated, then they write it all out to make it easier for everybody. So it's very detailed. If you have something that cannot be approved conventionally or by right, then the technician will send information about you need to get a special permit for maybe a reduction in minimum required yard so that you can go into the setback. Because things like a sunroom are considered an addition to the house, they have to meet the full setback. And sometimes we'll have people that'll come in and they have a deck that got an encroachment and now they want to convert it to a sunroom and they can't do that by right. So we'll tell them how to do that. If it's something that they're building that isn't already existing, that they're converting, we'll tell them, okay, here are your choices. You can make this change to make it permissible by right, or you can get a special permit or whatever it may be, the zoning process you would need to go through. So, that's kind of a general overview. I'm happy to answer questions about specific things that come in. To back up a little bit, in the course of their review, they're going to look at the aerial imagery to make sure that what's on the plat matches what's in the field. Because I will tell you, and I don't think this is the case at all. You all are great, but you would be amazed at some of the stuff we see. a plat comes in and what's actually out there looks nothing like what's on the plat. And they either need to get a new plat. Sometimes we find substantial unpermitted work that's been done, and we're talking like entire buildings on lots. And if that's the case, then they got to go back and they got to add that and get permitted. You know, sometimes it's encroaching, they got to get a special permit. So we do clean it up. But they're evaluating the property, they're looking at what's there, and they're looking at what they want to put there to see if it meets the ordinance.
That's great. I'm curious about the permissible encroachment. Can you dig into that a little bit more? Like, are there special rules associated with that?
Yeah. So, and I will, once Brandy's talking, I will drop it in the chat. There's actually a great table that shows you. So, it depends on where the floor of the deck is. The elevation, you know, is the lowest point to the part you walk on. So under 4 feet, you know, there, you can go a certain number of feet into the setback. Over 4 feet, it just depends what, you know, how high. It's all really about the elevation. A roof deck gets some encroachment too, not as much. But like I said, we have a chart that breaks it all down, and I'll be happy to drop that in the chat for you.
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question on, this is sort of generic, but pertaining to covenants and easements. We often get the question, or we ask our clients if there are any covenants or easements on their property. And I found on some surveyors' plats, they'll list, you know, if there's sewer or water or whatever, but then other easements and covenants have been incorporated over time into the properties and they're not necessarily relevant. And do you have any guidance on how that's reviewed, or who would be a good person to reach out to for that?
So the technician doing the review is gonna, and I should have mentioned this, is gonna look to see if there are easements. Because, for example, if there's a stormwater easement, we can't approve the deck in there unless you have a hold harmless executed by the owner of the easement. Okay, so you know, I guess I would need a specific example of what I'm not. We really kind of evaluate them as they come in, because you got to look and see, you got to pull the deed book in the page, you got to look and see, you know, there's a lot that goes into what the easement is, who owns it. Sometimes it's a utility easement that you're allowed to put stuff. It just says they have access. You know, it just depends what the easement is. Some plats are much more thorough than others. You know, but that's another thing that the tech is going to use our mapping system to confirm, like what's there. And what's, or sometimes there's an abandoned easement. You just don't know. And I know that's a tricky thing. Now covenants, are you talking about like HOA related covenants?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably less important than the for the easements. Because I was, you know, it was just when we would have our surveyor do the work, and they didn't always, like, they had records from years ago of other, you know, easement for the utilities that were no longer relevant, but, you know, it was, I don't know at what level, how far deep they need to go back in time to see what ones are still.
Well, I mean, if there's a valid easement on the property, we're going to look at it, but
Okay.
you know, and if you have a question, we're always happy to talk to you about it. But you know, I would certainly hope the surveyor is including anything that's,
Yeah, they
property.
typically they find the, yeah. All right, good. That answers my question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I just add to that? I mean, I think there is kind of a hierarchy of, so I'm Bill Hicks with LDS. I think there is kind of a hierarchy in the question that you asked. If the county is a party to the easement, we are definitely looking to make sure that that is there. I think the surveyor should be acknowledging all active easements on the property. Covenants, the county is almost never a party to that. So our role somewhat ends at acknowledging that this is there and that the property owner has a responsibility to it. And they can, you know, if you build something that deviates from the intent of the covenant, that is a problem. It may not be a county problem, but it may well be a private party problem.
That's helpful, because some of the terminology when we're contracting with the surveyors.
Yep.
But if I let them know all the active easements they need to acknowledge. Okay, thank you.
I guess I do have a question about some of when you do your aerial view and you discover that there's decks or structures that shouldn't be there or weren't permitted. What is the process to resolve that? Because I've only run into it a handful of times, not work we've done, but it's been done. What's the process to get that resolved?
So what we try to do is reach out to the applicant and have them add whatever the work is to the current permit, to the scope, because, but we recognize also, like, sometimes the current contractor didn't do whatever work, and so they don't want it on their permit. And so then we can work with a homeowner to have them, but we do get it permitted. The easiest way to do it is often to add it to the scope. There are situations where we have people that are incredibly resistant and we turn it over to code compliance. If it's super, because the thing is, it's about safety, right? So if you got a structure out there, particularly like a deck or who wants me to fall through it? So now I'll tell you other little zoning stuff. Like if we find let's say a shed, that is encroaching and it's, it needs to be dealt with, but it's not. A shed is like, we'll call the owner and we'll say, look, we're flagging this on your property. We're going to approve your permit, but you can't get any more until you got to fix it before next time. So we try to be really flexible and we work with the applicant. But more times than not, they end up adding whatever it was to their current scope of work to get it inspected and move it all through.
Okay. The last experience I had, the homeowners built the deck and you all did exactly that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let it pass through. We still got our addition built and it's great, but okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, Kristen.
Yeah, so Brandy is also here, and we thought it would also be worth just going over the site review that happens really concurrently with zoning's review. So I'll turn it over to Brandy.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right, perfect. So yes, my name is Brandy Mueller. I met this group a couple of times now, so thank you for having me again. So I am the branch chief of our site and permitting and bonds intake section within the LDS. So we're doing that initial review of the permit itself, and then we're doing a site review as part of that application. And so we're looking in the case where you submit most often with a house location survey or a plat. Our team is looking to determine based on the scope what is the associated land disturbance. So we're going to run through, the county has a web page, Land Disturbance 101. It's linked to every permit library page where it's relevant. And so we, using the criteria that we outline on that page, we measure your plat and we determine what the land disturbance is, considering the foundation, considering the work zone, and considering access. And we determine if the land disturbance is going to be under the regulated threshold, which is 2,500 square feet, right, for Fairfax County, for our locality. And if it's under that number, we can review it off of a plat and not require a grading plan. And if it exceeds that number, which this group generally knows, and if it's going to exceed that number, then you're providing us with an infill lot grading plan or a conservation plan, or if it's a bonded project, a subdivision grading plan. And so we do our reviews based off of those two items. If it's under the 2,500 square feet, and so you're working with that plat, we also, similar to zoning, are going to look at our GIS application we call GEM, and we're going to look at aerials of the project, and we're going to look at whether there are any easements, those county regulated easements, as Bill mentioned. We're really looking at your floodplain, your storm drainage, and sanitary sewer easements. And we're making sure that there isn't an encroachment. In cases where there is an encroachment, we will fail our review because you have an encroachment without any kind of evidence that the easement was vacated. And if in certain instances, we'll work with our DPW counterparts to get a hold harmless agreement. Decks are a common encroachment that maybe there was there over the years and it's been there and there's no infrastructure in that easement. And so we kind of do that due diligence and are the liaison will work with Public Works outside of the application, get their input, and then make a comment in plus for you in either direction. Either you can't have it in that easement and you need to relocate it, or we can proceed, but you're going to have to execute a hold harmless agreement, and we kind of tell you how to do that. So you've probably seen that. We've tried to improve consistency of that process. We also look at any environmental aspects. So we're going to look at whether you're in a conservation easement, resource protection area, or floodplain on the property. And if you are proposing an encroachment within those areas, do you have the prerequisite approvals, an FPUD for floodplain encroachment, or a waiver, a WRPA, or WQ for an RPA encroachment? And if you don't, and oftentimes they don't when the permit comes in, that's how they kind of find out, we would fail it for that comment, and we would note what kind of approvals you have to obtain and reference the appropriate contact in the agency in case you have questions about those separate applications that are records in plus as well. But you would have to go through that process to get them approved and then resubmit your permit once you've obtained those approvals. For decks, that's often the minor addition walkthrough application for RPAs that I think a lot of you are familiar with. And so once you obtain that approval, you address the open issue in plus and resubmit, and we would approve it as that comment is addressed. So we're looking at that. We're also, to Catherine's point, looking at any potential changes on the site. If you have those environmentally sensitive areas and we notice encroachments have occurred, unpermitted encroachments, we're going to do similar to what Catherine's going to do. If it needs a building permit, we're going to make that comment. Usually they include that in the scope, revise their plans, revise their plat to bring it into compliance. If it's something that didn't need a permit, like pavers or a patio, it depends on how severe. If the whole lot is impervious without approval, we're going to hold up that permit until the lot comes into compliance. If it's something smaller or not egregious, been there for 20 years, different owner, we're going to work with them and kind of help them get into compliance aside from that permit that's currently in, and just use that as an opportunity to educate them on the requirements in the process. And then if it's a grading plan, obviously most of that site work has already been evaluated. We're just ensuring that the scope that the site related plan was approved for matches the scope that is shown on your architectural plans, and that it's within the same footprint. You haven't made any changes. And if you haven't, we approve it. And if there are changes, if an orientation has changed, if a size is different, you're going to get a failed comment saying you need to revise your site related plan, your grading plan. And you all have worked through that as well, where that's a separate submission in plus until that's approved and you can resubmit your permit. So I think at a high level that's the process. And if you have any questions about certain instances, I'm happy to answer them.
I have a question about the hold harmless agreements.
Sure.
What is the purpose of those, or when would they be applied? Is it because it's something that doesn't comply and you're looking for a way to just talk us through that?
Sure. So I think most commonly we'll see it with a replacement permit. You have a deck, it's aged, and they want to upgrade it. They want to replace it and bring it up with new decking. And so this deck has already been there and it encroached at some point into this easement. And so now we realize you want to replace it, make it safer. And so we want to allow for that, but we recognize that it's encroached. So we work with our public work partners to go over what that structure actually is, and the potential impact. And for a deck, for example, it's very minimal. It's not an enclosed structure. It's not impervious. And so we look at whether or not there's actual infrastructure in place within that easement. And then we can determine if there's no risk at hurting any infrastructure or impacting it. Then our DPW partners will let us know when a hold harmless agreement is applicable. That in that case, they're willing to allow it, but the risk is solely on that individual party. Because if there is a need for maintenance, there is an easement beholden to the county has the right to that area. And so if they have to come in and do any work, that deck may be removed and they do not have the obligation to replace it, because you have been made aware of this easement, you have been made aware of the deed and restrictions contained therein, and you're doing it anyway, and we recognize the risk is minimal, but there is risk. And so that hold harmless agreement is just the acknowledgement by the property owner that that risk exists, they're absorbing it, and they've been made aware. And then because it's recorded at land records, any future owner is also made aware at the same courtesy, so that we don't have that awkward conversation, you know, if something were to happen. But we make that determination as the county partners, and then just inform the applicant one way or the other. So you either know you can have it, and this is how you can have it, or you cannot. But we now do that due diligence outside of the system, so you have a comprehensive answer, and we no longer put it on the owner to go find that out. We used to say, this is an easement, reach out to the county entity and gain approval. We now realize there's a lot more technical conversation that has to occur. So we absorb the conversation on the back end and then just tell you the result and give you the direction and how to, and we even fill out the hold harmless agreement for you and just leave out the information where the owner signs so that it's accurate, county attorney approved. And once the owner has signed and notarized the document, we don't hold up the permit application while we get it recorded and do all of that, because that can take a couple of weeks. As long as we have your effort completed, we allow the permit application to advance.
Great, thank you very much. Any other questions? Looks like you got it all solved. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Kristen?
Yeah, I think that was all we had. I don't know if there were any follow-up questions from the conversation that Hellman alluded to earlier about requirements for house location plats. I don't know if that was who asked the question, but did we need to talk any further about that?
They are not on today.
Okay. Okay.
So, but doesn't mean you can't get, if someone else wants to talk about it, it's fine, but. Or anything else that popped in your mind that you wouldn't, while you have their time and attention, anything else you want to bring up?
Yeah, I didn't know exactly what the question was. I know there was just a question about the different requirements between, I think, a plat submission for a plat that was under review versus a house location plat that was being submitted to accompany a building permit. So we do have requirements online. Maybe we can send you that link that describes what's required for a house location plat. Maybe that will start to answer the question, but if not, happy to, answer anything else that anyone has.
Is there someone like, is it you that he would call directly, or would that?
Yeah, you could call me or Brandy, but we'll be happy to get you in touch with the right person.
Okay, that will work. Anyone have anything else? So we'll get the, Catherine's having trouble cut and pasting the chart, so she's going to send me that, and I'll get it out to you all.
I just sent it, Debbie.
Okay, great, thank you.
This is related back to the question I asked earlier about the easements, and Brandy, you sort of covered it a little bit. When you're reviewing the site plan and you go through to make sure that there isn't any encroachments into the easements, is there a document that's accessible to us that we can also look to see if, like, there are the gas and the water and all of that? Otherwise, we're kind of relying again back on our surveyor. But I didn't know if, like when I've tried to call the gas company or others about that, it's been very challenging.
So what we typically, we also rely on the surveyor. They're supposed to be putting that seal on there. We've done that due diligence as far as the plat and the site related plan. But what we use is that GEM GIS application, which the equivalent on the customer facing side would be JADE, JADE, and I could put the link to JADE in the chat. But again, that's a comprehensive look, but not a guarantee, right? We have the disclaimer that it's not a guaranteed representation of all restrictions on the property, but we check there because we have a lot of utility information and other easements that are covered in there. And then additionally, all of county staff have access to the circuit court land record system. And so as we call it CPAN, and I know citizens and applicants can request access, and I think you pay a nominal fee to have access. I know as a permit expediter, I used to utilize the system. So it is available to those that request access. And so we go in there, and if we have a suspicion that there's an easement, or we're worried that it's not, and again, county easement is going to be our focus, and we're going to do this level of research, but we would type in the parcel ID And it will pull up what they have in land records having been recorded, so we can actually view the deed language in case there's been a vacated easement that wasn't shown, or in case we want to read the detail of the restriction, because some deeds say exactly what they allow, and then we don't have to reach out to Public Works and we don't have to ask those questions if it's very specific and clear. So those are the 3 resources that we leverage consistently to determine if there's an easement.
Thank you. That's great. And I see that you've, it's been included here and the link. Thank you.
Great.
Anybody else?
What are the requirements for a whole house generator?
Are you asking about the what needs to be submitted for a permit?
Well, no, really, yeah, I mean, absolutely.
the-
Is there zoning requirements? How far away from the setback does it have to be? That kind of thing. Is there a maximum number of decibels that are allowed at the property line? I mean, any and all information is good.
So I can get you that I don't know it off the top of my head because I don't deal with them daily. I'm happy to get you that information. I do know we do have specific information about that. Debbie, if I get it to you, can you get it to him?
Yes.
Or to okay, I'll get it to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then do you also have technical questions about kind of the specs of the generator, or?
Well, we install kinds. I mean, so if we're installing a 38 kW, which is going to have a certain decibel level, with the setbacks and setbacks are different in all jurisdictions all over the place. So what we try to do is, find out and get a plat, and, we physically used to go down to the county. Now, when you're trying to do a submission, we're almost having to go through zoning before we can get a permit for it. So I just didn't know. We've been fighting this issue in several jurisdictions. So it was just a question about zoning.
Okay.
Doug, do you have any questions? Thought I'd give it a try.
Mr. Medley, it's 5 feet into the setback,
Thank you.
and it can't be greater than 10 feet in width and within 5 feet of any lot line. I just pasted it into the chat.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Temperatures on generators, they have a lot of different things as well. We have to stay 5 feet from doors and windows. We need to have certain amount of clearance for exhaust. You have to have certain amount of clearance for intake. And then when you add all of those things up, so then you got to make sure that wherever the perfect location is, that it's not going to have any issues as far as the setbacks and things like that. So appreciate the clarifications.
I cut and pasted it for you, Rob. I'll get it to you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else?
Well, team, what a great job. I think we just conclude till next quarter.
Next quarter, start thinking about what we need to talk about. And we'll get it
That's
set
right.
up. Well, you all have a
Wonderful.
wonderful Thanksgiving, because that'll be here at the blink of an eye. We won't see you, I guess, until next year, unless something comes up that is urgent, then we'll schedule something. So.
We certainly appreciate your participation in these. It's very, I know a lot of people are watching them on YouTube and watching them on the videos of them. It's really important for us to be able to have a forum and be able to connect with you all, and really appreciate the time that you guys give us. We really do.
Absolutely.
No problem.
I think the feeling is mutual. We are glad to participate in it. We do feel like it's a partnership, and we are glad to be here with you.
Great. Yeah, anytime you have some questions or need us to survey the folks or something, we're always happy to do that as well. So I'm going to end the recording. I can figure out how to do it. Okay,
Thank you all. That was great.